Brilliant. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar from the BHF Data Science Centre. I'm Matt Sydes. I'm hosting today while Kathy's away, and I'll be giving the first presentation too, where I'll be talking to you about data-enabled trials. And then I'll be handing over to Honghan Wu, who's going to be talking to us about some of the COVID-19 work that he's been leading and involved with, which I'm very excited to hear. Now, hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm not sitting in a way that I was expecting to, so I'm slightly, I've thrown myself a little bit here, but let's see what we can do. So I'm going to talk to you about data-enabled trials and the BHF Data Science Centre, and what we've ambitiously called Ushering in the Future here. So for those of you who don't know me, who am I? So I'm Matt Sydes. 80% of the time, I'm Professor of Clinical Trials and Methodology at the MRC Clinical Trials Unit at UCL, where I've been running clinical trials for many, many years. But for the last 6-8 months, I've been seconded a day a week to the BHF Data Science Centre to lead on the data-enabled trials theme, and I'm super excited to be here. Many of you I've met and interacted with. Others I will not have. So if there's anything you wanted to find out about me, I'm sort of vaguely there online. I nearly gave you a link to my LinkedIn, which you're very welcome to connect to me on, but LinkedIn wouldn't send me a code to allow me to get in this morning for some reason. I've just had my laptop rebuilt and it's not working properly for me, which is interesting. So, clinical trials, what makes clinical trials different to other forms of research? And why has the BHF Data Science Centre got a theme just about clinical trials? Well, actually, clinical trials are important for us. They're the gold standard for evidence-based medicine. They're run within a complex regulatory framework, particularly if it's drug trials and we're looking for licensing, but any trials are run to a very high and slightly complicated standard. I say the important thing about clinical trials is they can directly impact on future healthcare provision. Consent is nearly always taken from participants, which is important. They're informed for what's happening and what's going through. Allocation in late phase trials is at random between 1 or 2 things that are being tested, or more if you're running a multi-arm trial. We have strict follow-up protocols, so people are being seen as and when the trial requires them. We have prospective data collection, so we're not going back and saying, using what we've got already, we're collecting new data. And we have very strict reporting standards for what comes out of the trial as well. And so it's worth bearing in mind that a phase 3 trial, those randomized controlled trials, would take hundreds or thousands of participants, can take tens or hundreds of participating sites. They may take anywhere between 3 and 10 years to get an answer, and may cost millions, tens of millions in the case of drug company trials. It costs a huge amount, and we don't want to get them wrong. Worth bearing in mind that the clinical trials are really the only route to testing treatments that are not already in use. So yes, plenty of call to use more real-world evidence, and you've heard more of that on radio news this morning and places where that can be used. But for things that are new, you're not going to be able to get that out of you're not going to be able to pull out retrospectively where treatments have already been used. So why do we want to use more healthcare systems data for trials? I keep using the term healthcare systems data here, but I won't be consistent. I prefer that term to routinely collected data. If you participate in a trial, you may end up having scans or blood tests that wouldn't be part of your routine care, but there is a slot for those to be recorded in your electronic health record. So, you know, it's they haven't been collected because of routine interactions. They've been collected because of research. I'd love research to be routine. I'd love research to be a part of everyday practice, but that's a different ambition to today. So I think healthcare systems data is a much better term for us to use. Anyway, look, there's considerable overlap, as you would hope there would be, between the data that's needed for any clinical trial and the data that's already being collected in healthcare systems. An appropriate use of that healthcare systems data could reduce the duplication of effort. At the moment, you know, people are putting things into the hospital system, and they're also putting them separately into case report forms. Very often that's a nurse or a data manager transcribing them onto paper, sending them off to a trials unit where they get retranscribed in. That's a lot of work, a lot of effort, unnecessary duplication. It may lead to transcription errors. So we can reduce that if we take data straight out. We can then improve on other aspects of quality, particularly completeness of data. It allows us, when we're monitoring, to focus on the trial data and the system that actually need attention. And overall, this should reduce trial costs, allowing us to do more research within the limited funding budgets we have, and hopefully it may even reduce the burden in patients too. And actually, there are risks in not using healthcare systems data. You may have missed events if people are admitted to many hospitals. My poor dear old aunt was admitted to 5 separate hospitals during April and May last year. I'm pretty sure if she was in a clinical trial, at least one of those would have been missed. I'm certain, just because of bouncing around systems. So, have trials been accessing electronic health records, healthcare systems data? Mostly they hadn't been. We ran a review, Sarah Lenson there led the review of 81 registries. And we found of those 81 registries, healthcare systems data collators, 22 of them have provided data to 160 trials between 2013 and 2018. We estimate that's only a small proportion of trials, equivalent of about 3% of UK trials, at least compared to the number in 2015, or certainly less than 5% of trials. Most commonly, people have been going to NHS Digital, to ISD Scotland, as it was called then, to Public Health England. Obviously, there's more centralisation of where those data sets are now, of course. Commonly, it was large cancer and cardiovascular trials. Cardiovascular trials, you folk here are ahead of the game in terms of potential. And I've come to this field from growing up doing cancer trials. But what the data were being used for varied considerably from trial to trial. You can contrast this with Andrew McKay's review. He looked at NIHR-funded protocols, and 50% of those said they were intending to access electronic health records. So there's a big disconnect there, isn't there? What's different between this intention for people to access electronic health records for trials and what they're actually doing? Well, so people often talk about making our trials data enabled. It's a silly term. What trials aren't enabled by data in any form? But digitally enabled is a perfectly good term, I think. So NIHR, Health Data Research UK, and Clinical Practice Research Data Link came together to run a data-enabled trials workshop a couple of years back now, looking at efficiencies on study design, on feasibility, on recruitment, on follow-up, and on analyses. And what could be embedded? You needed to be able to embed all of those into routine data if you could. And if we did this, according to some, I think if we're embedding at least some of them into the trial, then a lot more trials can be considered digitally enabled. That paper that came out of the workshop is now available. You can read it online. And these are the recommendations that came out of here. Wider adoption, building in methodology questions, early engagement of regulators, better patient and public involvement so we can collect the data better, greater interoperability. I won't run through all of these. You can read this for yourself. But this capacity and capability building, I think, is really important here. And many of these challenges, maybe much of what that came out of that is also echoed in the survey that the BHF Data Science Centre ran last spring. 56 people responded, 35 of whom are currently or previously involved in running cardiovascular trials. And the main challenges were about gaining access to data. What were the processes? About the lack of information, the lack of guidance, about the data issues, including availability and defining outcome measures, and about the costs, not just about the costs themselves, but about the clarity around those costs. What data sets people were using varied quite a bit, whether it was primary care or secondary care, whether it was registries, death data, other data sets. And what they were planning to use as well varied, whether it was about planning or recruitment or contacting, primary trial reports and long-term follow-up, different stages at which you could be using this. Many of you will know about the NHSX find, recruit, follow approach, which is about identifying how many patients are out there, how to identify those patients, how to use them in the longer term. And they've really been emphasizing on the identification. That is important. Many trials fail to recruit, and better identification would help. And certainly for prevalent case trials, that's going to help. But for incident case trials, where the patients are coming to clinic because they're newly diagnosed with something, then that's perhaps less of an issue. And the comments here, I imagine, will resonate with many of you, and you'll have heard them. And some of those are real for sure, and some of them may be perceived. They may just be real, but it doesn't matter either way, because if it's seen as a problem, then it's a problem that needs to be addressed. So what are we doing? Well, our vision is that within 5 years, a data-enabled trial will be the default approach for every new cardiovascular trial in the UK, in that broader definition. So we want to aim to streamline the use of routinely collected healthcare data for trial planning, for recruitment, for follow-up. And it's a really interesting area, because there are plenty of skeptics out there who say you can't get the data are out of date, the data are unusable. And there are plenty of true believers out there who say, well, why are you still doing trial-specific data collection? You should always be using electronic health records. And the truth at the moment is probably somewhere in between, varying on different outcome measures in different trial settings. So it's clearly an area that's ripe for guidance and ripe for research. So let me give you a very brief overview of our plan. I say we want to increase the number of cardiovascular clinical trials using routinely collected data sets. Well, we'd like to provide guidance and contribute to that guidance that's out there. So our goal is to make the necessary bureaucracy easier to navigate, make it easier to obtain ethics approval, obtain consent. We want to provide independent guidance to help trials navigate those processes. We want to make clear what data sets are available. So there will be web pages in due course on the Data Science Centre website, focusing on things that we think you as a community will find useful. We want to provide support packages through webinars and open clinics, and I'd really like to speak to you about whether you think that would be helpful. And we'd like to make it clearer what data sets are available. And so talk to us. A number of trials have spoken to us before they've submitted their grant applications. We're here for discussions. And there could be discussions about specific things, what data sets, how to use the data, about costs. I mean, we would like to think about going with a group of trials to negotiate for what appropriate costs would be here. So talk to us, use us as a resource here. We're keen to facilitate this. We want to develop best practice, and that involves establishing ways of accessing and using healthcare systems data to impact trials. We want to enable shareable data from trials as well that have used healthcare systems data. So one of the ways to do this is to have make a catalogue of trial case studies where people have used the data. We also want to record the timeliness with which you can get the data, and say develop best practice guidelines. So the case study approach is really important. We had 2 of the HDIR UK interns with us last summer who did a great job of heading off and trying to construct narrative case studies from some of the trials that accessed and used data. And those were been identified from the survey that the Data Science Centre ran last year, and the review that Sarah Lenson had run. And as I say, we've got short case studies. We want to put those on the website. The intention is to make those available. You can then comment on how useful you find them and help us flush out more case studies, more questions about the ones that are there. We want to make these useful. We want to make you want to read these case studies. And so we need your input and your help in constructing them. And as I say, all we're doing is cataloguing. All credit to the teams that have actually been doing this, of course. And I say access case studies can be helpful. If you've had an experience, put it in the literature. I think that's really important. Arjun McNair at the MRCCTU did this, accessing cardiovascular data to be used within a couple of cancer trials where they were looking at cardiovascular outcome measures. He found a real challenge in his trying to get the data during the time he was doing his MD. And so, we mapped this out. What was the experience? We shared this with the healthcare data systems data sets. They co-authored this paper, and they're now very much aware of the timelines. But we know that CTUs need good data structures, clinical trials units, and applicants need experience as to how to answer the data set. So something for everyone. It's not just the providers of data. Applicants need to be better aware. We want to be able to use our leverage to improve processes. We want to contribute to meaningful discussions. We want to be in the room where it happens. We're knowledgeable. We'd like to be able to influence and bring our thoughts here and collate those comments, collate the input and pass on your challenges to groups. We want costs to be consistent and durable, for example. We want to be able to influence that bureaucracy. I mean, the important thing is about funding here. Trial teams really get one bite at the funding cherry. It's upfront, it's early on. But the costs of routine data are often not clear up front. Trial teams often don't even know what data they need exactly at that point or how often they want it. And if you got a quote from NHS Digital, NHS Scotland, it often lasts a very short amount of time, far less than the amount of time that's available that's taken in the grant review process. So it's very difficult to do that. Or if you've been collecting trial-specific data collection, you want to engage in SWOTs, data utility studies, we'll talk about those in a second, you may want to go back and get that data, but then you don't have the money to do it. So how can we influence? How can we make that happen? Part of that community collation, we ran with Gavin highlighting here in the cardiac surgery group, some workshops in October, really setting out over 2 half days, good discussion, challenges and solutions to those. And the report for that should be available on the workshop on our website quite soon. An important new piece of work is thinking about developing standard outcome definitions and code lists. We want community agreed algorithms. It's not just a code list, it's how do you connect them together? How do you, from what data sources, how connected in time and space do they need to be? What if you've got missing data? We need community agreed, say, algorithms and best practices. So we've started that. We convened an initial group. That launch meeting was last week. It's a small group, mostly clinical people. We need to widen that out. We will need you to be involved in this. It's going to be really important for us to help us define this. I say we'll start with a few things and build out. We're calling this SCORE CVD, and I might get Jackie to put in the chat how we were defining the word SCORE, because it's a slightly lost my memory right now. And so we're doing this together with the computable phenomics theme, which Spiros is leading. I say we want to define what the practices may be. We want to flush out those phenotypes, those recipes for defining outcome measures that are already there. I'd say the aim is to get to better approaches. We need to identify what's been done, set out our good processes, set out our additional requirements, define with the community those defined the definitions, develop them, and then disseminate that. And the aim is to get some of those out within the next year. And then we want targeted driver activity as well. And that's really about enabling evidence that routinely collected health data can support clinical trials. And some of this is going to be about the utility of healthcare systems data, and some is about other experiences here. So let's pick out this. We have to co-develop SWOT protocols with you. I mentioned that, but let's first talk about, there's a report that's online as of last Friday, looking at whether routinely collected health data, 2 data sets can be used as as source data for trials. Actually, they're effectively usable. Now we're going to be challenging other healthcare systems data holders to follow the process set out here. It's very freshly added. The paper that describes this was only submitted, hopefully this afternoon, actually. It's been led by Macy, and Macy will be with us for a webinar in May. So let's save the details on this until now, but this is a very exciting development. Okay. Data utility is really important. How good are the routine data? Can we be using these to replace trial-specific data collection? Where can we and where can't we? So we did this, Sharon Love at MRCCTU and Anna Kolnowski, who was an MSc student. We got data from a gastroesophageal study, just looking at death, but they were getting death periodically from NHS Digital, and they were only seeing the patients every couple of years. And what you can see here is agreement of various data freezes. We always have more deaths from NHS Digital than we did from trial-specific data collection, but there was a few deaths that have come through from trial-specific methods that the NHS Digital didn't know. It's a rather complicated graph here. I'll leave you to read this in the paper, but we could be doing more of this. Death is an easy one to do. And the SWOT that underpins this, SWOT 125, you can find it on the SWOT repository in Belfast. If you want to copy that approach on your data set, please talk to us. Very happy to run through. We need more of these. So there's some in the literature. Siam Ahmed, a PhD student working with me with my MRCT hat, has been looking at these. been doing a systematic review for published comparisons, but there's more out there, I'm sure, that haven't yet been published. So do you have the potential to do one, or do you have an unpublished comparison? Could you publish it? Can we help you? We know of a few out there. People have presented these at conferences. They're tucked at the back of a paper and it's difficult to find. You made that comparison. Help us if you're aware of these. Flush them out. Tell the Data Science Centre. Bring it to our attention. I say, Siam's Prospero review is listed there. One's just come out in the cardiovascular world. Charlie Harper, as part of his PhD, working with the Ascend team, really looking at a series of cardiovascular outcome measures, which is really important, showing sort of good specificity is really good. If you found it in the routine data, almost certainly existed, but there's a chance sensitivity was a little bit lower here. We need more of this. One trial doesn't answer this, right? What we need is that patchwork blanket. That's why we've drawn this here. Series of outcome measures. We stitch it together. No one trial is good enough to tell us one way or the other, but each one is really important. So the work that they've done here is really lovely, and they've looked at the treatment effect as well. Great stuff and well worth a read. Let's stop for a very quick advert break for things that I think you'll find interesting. Firstly, there are a couple of jobs out with the Data Science Centre at the moment. One looking, is this the right one? It's a data scientist, and there will be one, and the diabetes data science catalyst as well. There'll also be one coming soon to work with us on the trials theme. So if there's, if you think there's anybody that might find these roles of interest, then please point them in our direction. If you've been working with the routine data and you want to help us think about some of the methodology questions, the NIHR MRC Trials Methodology Research Partnership has a survey out called Cormorant at the moment. It's missing an R. I'll claim the naming rights on helping put together the name for this, but I won't claim the typo. That wasn't there. But Fiona Ludviger in Cardiff is leading on this. Tell us what you think the challenges are, what the methodological questions are. TMRP has put a little bit of money in to do this, but it's feeding into HDR UK, and that's where some of this is going to go, and some of that will follow through to BHF Data Science Centre. What are the methodology questions? Not the operational issues, but the methodology here. So scan, follow the link, go to the Twitter feed for Cormorant. You'll be able to see that. And please contribute. To only take you a couple of minutes. You may or may not be aware of the International Clinical Trials and Methodology Conference. It's the largest academic conference on clinical trials methodology. It's next running, it runs every couple of years. It's next running in Harrogate in October. And if you've got SWOT comparisons that you think you might be able to look at, if you've got data utility experiences, this is a place to present them. You'll be presenting them to a community. Data scientists, statisticians, trial teams, clinicians in particular, anyone who attends this always enjoys it. There'll be about 600 or 700 people there. Very friendly, very good environment. I would strongly encourage you to be thinking about submitting abstracts. And if you can't submit an abstract, you attend anyway. And if you've got something you're not sure about, give us a shout. I'm talking here with the Data Science Centre hat on, but I'm also chairing the scientific committee of that conference. And just to mention very briefly, if you're interested in the clinical trials, the MRC Clinical Trials Unit runs now online MSc in clinical trials. And we've got a brand new statistics for clinical trials MSc that's starting up. Mostly we're thinking that's going to be for undergrads who are currently doing numerate degrees, or for people who are thinking for clinical folk who want, or data scientists who want to get an extra something under the belt. So really focused, great group going to be running that. That's the end of the advert break. Please forgive me for doing that. Just tell you very briefly about one new paper that just came out, which I think will be of interest, and I think it falls under this. One of the three hats I'm wearing here is a BHF Data Science and App. This is about guidance to protect blinded clinical trials in EHR systems. In a blinded clinical trial, at least one group doesn't know the allocation. That may be the participant, often it may be the person assessing. Very often that's done with a placebo, but it doesn't have to be, or a sham treatment. That doesn't have to be the way. We've identified, though, a couple of ways in which people could be accidentally unblinded. People may see things that they shouldn't. We kept it all very hypothetical in the short paper that's just come out in clinical trials. But in the electronic health record systems, the hospitals that are using them, there's so many role functions that actually not everybody gets protected from what they should. So in a patient portal, you might see information that tells you what you've been allocated to, for example. So this needs really careful consideration by trial teams in setting this up, and really careful monitoring by site teams. I set out some actions here. We've also put in the appendix of this, a couple of templates that people should follow in looking at what they might do. Very helpful to discuss. If you don't want to read a 600-word paper, then there's a 200-word Twitter thread if you prefer. Let's keep our reading light, eh? Okay. So you saw our vision, data-enabled trials. Let's make it the default within 5 years. As I say, our aim is to streamline. There are challenges. We want to help work on the solutions. And we're one of many groups doing this. As I say, I'm wearing an MRC CTU hat here. TMRP is important. HDR UK is critically important. NRHR is a real driver here. And there's so many people that I could have and should have put on here, but I didn't. Anyway, I'm going to pause there, and maybe we've got